Welcome back, welcome back. Having moved to France at the age of 19, Kristin Scott Thomas has become internationally renowned for her talent and indeed her elegance, both on stage and on screen, both in English and in French. Her performances in The English Patient and The Horse Whisperer won her much acclaim, but so have her roles in French films, including I've Loved You So Long and Leaving. I met Kristin earlier, and we spoke about her new film, Salmon Fishing in the Yemen. Before we hear from Kristin, let's take a look at a clip.
Yes, Prime Minister. I'm working on it right now. I think I may have come up with something that you'll like. We need a good news story from the Middle East, a big one. Get on with it. New girl band, Middle East tour. Maybe. No, maybe not. Project to introduce salmon fishing to the Yemen.
This thing is a bloody joke. There are 2 million fishermen in the UK.
2 million out there waving the little rods around? Marvellous. This has just become a priority project.
This is plainly ridiculous. We would need to trap 10,000 salmon, get them to the Yemen alive, which would allow your sheikh to hoik them out of the water to his heart's content. Of course, until the dry season, when they will all die.
Kristin, this is a great title, just for starters, this film. I mean, Salmon Fishing in the Yemen is a great title, isn't it?
It is a great title. I mean, it's nothing to do with the film. I mean, the film is an adaptation of the novel, which, of course, has the title Salmon Fishing in the Yemen, which was a very successful novel. So we just lifted that from that, and there was no need to do any tweaking.
Yeah. And then, but among the changes, it's pretty close to the novel in many ways, but you had to change your sex, or change the sex of the character.
They changed the spin doctor to a woman, so that's where I come in. But I think it was quite a tricky job doing the adaptation, because in the novel it's a series of letters and emails, and there's no actual dialogue between people, so they had to kind of invent all of that and sort of start from scratch. But with
Simon Beaufoy.
Yes, that's right, and he did Slumdog Millionaire and The Full Monty, so you know he's pretty good.
Pretty damn good. Pretty damn good. But so it stayed fairly true. And if you had to describe what the film is really about,
I think it's really a love story, but based on this sort of political crazy backdrop of this madcap idea to bring salmon fishing into the desert for political reasons, to make the government look good. So it's a love story with a very comedic background, basically. But we had quite an adventure shooting all those scenes, because all the scenes with the dam, because obviously if they're going to import salmon into Yemen, they have to build dams to keep the water in the right place at the right time of year and all this kind of thing, to put the fish in. So we built all these things out in Morocco, but what they hadn't figured was the spring snow melting, and these flash floods swept away the actual dams that we'd built twice. So what was happening in the movie was actually happening for us. So we've got these great shots, all the stuff of the dam being broken. It couldn't have happened, at a more convenient time, really. We just had to shoot backwards and then go on hiatus a bit while they rebuilt the dam. But by the second time, they got really good at rebuilding the dam.
Really good. And by the third or fourth time, it'll be really good. Yeah, really. And your character, you said, is beastly, mean, and ruthless.
I think this about sums her up, yeah.
Yeah. Well, they're your words, actually.
Yeah.
Right. But I mean, is that more difficult to do? I mean,
well, it's great fun
an
to do.
unsympathetic part.
It is great fun to do. What was difficult in that part is that I didn't actually have anyone to bounce off for the most part. I was mostly talking into my telephone. So I'm sort of having these one-sided conversations, imagining the response on the other side. Sometimes I get lucky enough, one of the ADs would be able to supply me with sort of off lines, but it was mostly me pretending to hear other voices, so it made me go a bit mad. Yeah. But it was fun working with Lasse. It was great fun going to Morocco. Yeah. That was lovely. I've shot there a couple of times. And it was such a pleasure also watching the way Ewan McGregor and Emily Blunt worked together, because that was, the the chemistry that they have on screen is quite extraordinary, and it just sort of comes alive when they're on the screen. So that's lovely to watch.
And you are a real spin doctor in this unsympathetic.
Well,
I'm
basically trying to find something good to say about the people I work for, and I think I could be working for absolutely anybody. That the kind of character that Patricia Maxwell is, she has no particular ideals or anything like that. She just has a job to do, and she's going to do it, And so she's a bit like a kind of general.
But she's a British spin doctor, though.
Yes.
In this particular.
Yes, and a mother who runs her household like sort of a regiment. So she's quite formidable.
So that's the phrase that people use about you, this multitasker phrase, isn't it?
Oh, yes.
She's a multitasker, and you're a multitasker.
I don't know if I'm a good multitasker. Sometimes I think most women are, most working women are, aren't you? You have to keep so many balls in the air all the time. Yeah.
And the result is, you said, guilt.
But yes, in a strange kind of way, because some part of you is always thinking, oh, I didn't quite do that properly because I had to rush off and do that, or it's difficult being. It's also difficult. I mean, if I'm really honest, it's difficult being working away from home. It's really, it's heartbreaking, but that's what I do,
From the kids and so on.
Yeah, from home, from where I belong.
Mm-hmm. And you belong in France. You belong in Paris, and you have since.
Yes, I've
you
lived there
started
for a
here.
really long time now.
19 you started.
I started, I went there at 19, and that was a really long time ago. And it looks like I'm going to stay there, I guess, yeah. I haven't got French nationality yet.
And
I might be able to give up my British passport. I should probably keep my British passport as well.
You could have both.
I could have both, but just the idea of having yet another piece of paper that I could lose is terrifying.
And how about the thing about women, in the sense of women over the age of 40 or whatever, that French cinema is much more perceptive, much kinder than it would be if you were here looking solely for British parts.
Yeah, I mean, looking solely for British parts, I think that would be difficult because there just aren't that many, and there are a lot of extremely brilliant actresses around in the UK. And I think there's very few parts to be had. There's a lot more in the theatre, of course, which is where I really belong, I think. But yeah, the French cinema is much better with older ladies, if you'd like to put it like that. I don't like saying that. Women of my age, however old that may be, because they appreciate womanhood. They appreciate experience. They appreciate a woman who's brought up children. They like just experience. I think they find experience attractive. Whereas in other countries there seems to be a fear of experience and a kind of longing for innocence.
Yeah. Would America, Hollywood, have been worse than Britain in terms of what we're just talking about, the older woman or whatever?
Yeah, I mean, how many? I mean, we think we can count on one hand the number of women, sort of over 45, who work regularly and are counted as being, top notch.
You'd like to do more theatre, would you?
Oh yeah, definitely. I find theatre really,
you've got
really
the balance
stimulating.
too many films versus plays at the moment.
No. What would be in an ideal world? I'd make one French film, one English film, and do one play sort of every 18 months. That's the ideal world, and then have a bit of living in between.
Yes.
Because the problem is when you get to the difficulty is when you get to this grand old age and all this experience is that you tend to be given smaller parts in films because the leading lady is always 30 or something. So you have to do more of them to kind of keep the pot boiling, which means that you work non-stop, and then you don't have time. Actually, I don't think it's just in this business. I think it's in every single person I know of my age. They say, I thought things were going to get calmer, but everything just gets more. You just get busier and busier and busier. I'd love to be able to sort of kick back a bit and
yes.
sort of spend time just breathing.
Just breathing. Well, it's lovely to talk about all this. Thank you ever so much, Kristin.
It's a pleasure.
A real pleasure for me too. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
Our thanks to Kristin Scott Thomas. Now, since 1979, the economic growth of China has been quite remarkable. Its GDP has increased 18-fold, and it's now the world's second largest economy. Why is it so successful? Well, according to Zhang Weiwei, it's because China has its own unique model of development rather than copying the models of Western countries. Mr. Zhang should know. He's a professor of international relations in China, but back in the 1980s, he was the interpreter for a legendary Chinese leader, Deng Xiaoping, the man who transformed the Chinese economy. And Mr. Zhang has now written a book called The China Wave about all of this. I spoke to him earlier. What is your great memory of Deng Xiaoping? It's a privilege to have obviously known him, but as a man and as a visionary.
Yeah. As a visionary, he's one of the few leaders he can think in long terms. So his plan for China is 70 years. He worked out this plan in mid-1980s to, say, middle of this century, 21st century. And China is still following this plan. And as an individual, as a person, he is humorous. He enjoys cracking jokes and very frank and blunt, even.
Yeah. Oh, really? So
yes.
That was a fascinating experience to have worked closely with him. And what was his most important thing? He says there are two. He said there were two models of that China could follow economically, and of the two, one was following the West, and one was not following the West, really.
Yeah.
And which have you done, and which should you do?
Yeah, and he used a phrase. He said, "We should build socialism with Chinese characteristics." It's neither a copy of the Western model, nor a copy of the Soviet model. So it's something entirely new. But China should draw on whatever strengths in other models. So China has learned a lot from the Western model. But China has, however, stayed on its own course and keep to its own vision. And this is why China has made this miracle.
By that combination. And did he really introduce a lot of those ideas? Because he was a visionary, as we were saying.
For instance, for all the time, he advocated a relatively strong government. We use academic jargon called depoliticized, disinterested, relatively strong state, capable of shaping national consensus on reform, on tough reforms, on modernization. And again, behind this is something I call the Chinese political culture, based on meritocracy, based on performance-based legitimacy. And also he all along advocated mixed economy. The visible hand and the invisible hand should both play a very important role in the Chinese economy.
Why does state ownership work for China and not for France?
I think one of the major ideas of Deng Xiaoping is actually it's not a matter of ownership, rather it's a matter of whether you could create an environment for competition. You put state-owned enterprises into the environment of competition, that works. Right. So China has worked very hard to reform its state sector. Now all the major sectors, the state-owned enterprises, have gone through major reforms. So they are called the new state-owned enterprises.
And obviously you resisted the impact of the meltdown of 3 years ago and 2 years ago in the world and so on. Why were you able, why was China able to resist that trend towards meltdown? Or was it just geographical, that you were far enough away?
No, it's already China is part of the world economy, and China now is already the largest exporter. Now what's important is, first we have a relatively strong state, which actually controls the banking financial sector. In other words, the kind of carried away, derivative industries are forbidden in China, at least before the crisis. And second, importantly, we still have a state sector which is profitable. And if you look at the crisis in Europe or United States, mainly it's a matter of whether you could have more revenue for the government. And revenue could only come from taxation. But in China, a huge part of revenue comes from the state sector.
From the state sector?
Yes, right. Which creates jobs. Yeah.
And also in terms of the West looking at China and China looking at the West, obviously one of the other great phrases in Western dialogue is the phrase democracy.
Yeah.
We've talked about state ownership and things like that. Yeah. Do you think democracy could ever work in China, or do you think it wouldn't?
Yeah, it depends on how you define democracy. If it's defined as one person, one vote, and multi-party system, I'm not sure China will adopt that model, because I argue in my book, China is a civilizational state, amalgamation of hundreds of states over its long history. It's the size of continental Europe. And by adopting this approach, Western model, the country may become ungovernable. Yet we have our own tradition, which is meritocracy and performance-based legitimacy. So I said, in political field, we are doing a lot of interesting experiments, which can be summarized into, I call it, selection plus some kind of election. And that has worked, actually. Yeah, I think this model at least can compete with Western model, if not working better.
Well, that's really interesting. You're laying that out so clearly and interestingly.
Thank you.
We look forward to having a further conversation about this topic. And in the meantime, we wish you all the luck in the world with the China way.
Thank you.
Thanks for being with us.
Thank you very much.
Double, double, toil and trouble. Macbeth's witches could well have been talking about the Eurozone debt crisis, which took a new turn for the worse this week. As markets were shaken by France's presidential election, the Dutch government resigned, and just today we hear that Spain, shock of shocks, Spain has now been downgraded by 2 notches. In the never-ending Eurozone soap opera, the main question for fans is, how much longer can it go on? Every week brings a new plot twist and jaw-dropping cliffhanger. Potential bank collapses, crashing credit ratings, and cross-country chicanery. Hamish McRae, the chief economic commentator at the Independent newspaper, is with me now. Hamish, welcome. And let's begin the shock news today about Spain. How significant is that? Does it have an effect immediately on Spain's prospects?
At the margin, it makes matters worse because it pushes up Spanish borrowing costs. But the reality is the rating agency was really reacting to something that was already known, which is that Spain will struggle not to need a bailout. It may squeak by, but it may need a bailout. And I think that all the rating agencies were saying is that Spain is as big a trouble as we thought.
By the way, do these rating agencies have valid power, or is it a bit dubious? I mean, they seem to have the ability to bully nations all over Europe. What is there about Standard & Poor's that is more competent than Brussels or Germany or Britain?
Well, they are, to a sense, independent. You have 3 main rating agencies. They do the job slightly differently. They do slightly different ways of making their calculations. And I think people look not just at the rating at the end, but what they say in their calculations. And so I think in some senses, the agencies probably reinforce the views of the markets rather than leading them. But I don't think that they are terminally effective if things go wrong.
Right. Absolutely clear. Absolutely clear. So just come back to Spain for a moment here. What is the effect going to be today and next week on what's happened to Spain? Has it made the problems of the whole Eurozone worse?
I think the short answer is yes. It pushes up the rates of Spanish borrowing rates a little bit on the market. I can't remember the exact amount of what it was, but something like 0.25% for 10-year bond, something like that. That's not good. It comes on top of, as your introduction said, a lot of other negative stuff.
Yes.
And therefore the cumulative effect on Europe is bad.
And so that the effects may hasten. Can anyone do something decisive at this moment, or is the nature of the situation that the whole situation is in control and no countries can really interfere with it?
I think that there are two big forces against each other. One is political will, backed by the ability of the European Central Bank to lend the money, to print the money, and backed by the IMF, backed by the global financial establishment, more or less wanting to try and keep the show on the road. And the other is, against that, is the economic tension between North and South, between core Europe, Germany doing very well, between core Europe and the struggling southern fringe.
And will we see more banks fail?
I think we will see more banks needing help. In other words, needing to be bailed out. I do not believe banks will be allowed to fail.
And what about, therefore, in that context, Santander, this very large bank, Spanish bank? If you were an investor in Santander, would you be withdrawing your money today?
I think that Santander, it's the largest Spanish bank, it's hugely diversified. Everyone who is closer to this subject than me says it is the strongest bank in Spain. Right. So it is very solid. Its shares have, however, fallen very sharply in recent months, and obviously it is a Spanish bank, and people may start to become suspicious of it unfairly because of that.
What effect will the Greek elections have when they come along, depending on the results, obviously?
I think that it's a test of technocratic government. It's not just do people want more austerity, they don't want more austerity. It's whether the technocrats, the people who are dealing with the nuts and bolts detail of Greece, are allowed to continue doing that, or will there be a rejection of all that? The fringe candidates get in and the Greeks say, this isn't going to work, we're going to leave the euro, sorry chum.
And so, will the euro survive?
Well, my own view is that something called the euro may well survive, and we shouldn't underestimate the desire to keep it together. But eventually, a number of countries will be forced to leave.
And then there will be no euro?
Then I don't know.
How many countries do you need to still have a euro?
You could have a sort of northern euro, a hard euro and a soft euro. I don't think that... The problem is you can't see the detail. One can see broadly what's likely to happen over the next 10 years. It's all somewhere away. You can kick it forward if you want to for quite a while. What you can't see is the detail of how the euro might break up. It'd be lovely if you could, but you can't. Yeah.
Not much dancing in the streets, however, in the economic quarters of Europe.
I'm afraid that there's going to be more pain in the months to come.
Hamish, thank you as ever. Great to have you with us. Isn't it good to have him with us?
Thank you very much.
I'm afraid that's all we've got time for this week, but my thanks to all of my guests. Do join us again in 7 days' time for another. Oh, it's going to be a particularly interesting one next week, but then it always is, really, doesn't it? Anyway, Frost Over the World, 7 days from now.